What is up, everybody? This is Kevin J. Brown here. It has been a New York minute since I have been on the YouTube streets, and I'm happy to be back once again. So we got something to talk about, something that just from my perspective, with um, something I had a discussion with someone earlier today, someone who was Gen Z, and he was asking me what do you think about the generations? I told him I couldn't give an answer on that because I don't know all the generations. I don't know everything they went through. And so we talked about, okay, well, why don't you just describe things from the millennial point of view? How do you want to go about that? So this is exactly what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be sharing that with you all. But before I do, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure that you leave your feedback, throughout the conversation. And then, even after the conversation, if you're watching through the replay, leave your comments there. Hit the like button. And if you are new here, make sure that you subscribe so that way that you are able to pick up more videos from me. All right. So I had a conversation and I was talking to him about what I went through, as a millennial. Not everything, but I was sharing with him that one of the things that was very important about the millennial generation, that is important to know about the millennial generation because we're still here, was that we were the generation that was introduced to social media, in our teenage years. So when we first came along, in the '90s, because I was born in '89, so I was in a mid millennial. When I was growing up, we had a foundation from our from the '90s that I think did a good job in serving us, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, just for me personally. But that was kind of like the last era, I should say, or somewhere around the last times the period before we really started getting heavy into technology. It was very common for seeing kids be outside. It was very common to use your imagination a lot, because you were outside and things like that. So outside was just kind of like the normal routine for us. We weren't always in front of a screen 24/7, like where we are now with our phones. We had like our Game Boys and things like that, or we may have had video games. That me personally, I had video games. I watched the transition from the Sega Genesis, excuse me, the Sega Genesis, and then we made that transition from 2D games getting into like 3D games, and watching that with PlayStation and Nintendo 64. So there were these constant transitions that came up during the millennial year that kind of prepped us into the digital age, but we still had that foundation of that kind of family, that kind of like family unit type of thing that we would see pretty often. That was kind of like very common, like being outdoors, being out with family, watching family TV shows. I remember that there was a time, when I was growing up, if you were watching Nickelodeon and Nick Jr., you know that what one of the things that were happening during that time was that there were these segments that would come up on through television. They would come up through like Nick Jr. or Kid Disney or something like that. I think now they call it Disney Junior, but at that time it was like Disney for Kids or something like that. If you were watching Nickelodeon, you were watching shows like Little Bear. You were watching Little Bill. You were watching Blue's Clues and things like that. If you were watching Disney, you were watching you know it wasn't Mickey Mouse Club. It was Out of the Box, and Little Bit. I'm sorry, Bear in the Big Blue House, things like that. All these shows that were really focused on, not necessarily um, making them kids specific or kids oriented, but it was still kind of like that. But it was still the aspect of having family or being around family, or it was something that the family could watch, together, and gain from. Then it transitioned over into like the teenager, or like the um I guess the elementary to like middle school type of thing, where you will have those types of shows that would come up. And then the teenagers would come up, and the teenager segment would come up. And then late in the night, you will watch shows like Nick at Night, if you were watching Nickelodeon, or you were watching, if you were watching Disney, you were watching um, the Vault Disney, where they would show like these classic shows from like the 50s and 60s, some even like the 40s and stuff. And what I was telling him was the millennial period was a very important year, very important time for me as a kid, because there were all these different homages that represented family for children, and how that kind of laid a foundation for early parts of my life. I remember getting up watching watching Zorro. Like the Zorro would like come on at midnight, and then like right after that would be the Mickey Mouse Club. And so I would not go to bed until I would watch those shows because I really enjoyed them. They really helped in establishing my childhood, along with those other shows that we would watch as kids. Like there would be times where we couldn't watch them because we would go to school. Those shows would be like for little bitty kids. But when you were able to take a break from school, you would be able to see those types of shows. And so the 90s, and I think even the early 2000s, were the time in which we were exposed to seeing how family oriented, um, kind of family oriented. I want to say how life was, but I can at least say that was the case for television shows, and I think that reflected life as well. And I was telling him that it wasn't until around like 2006 or seven that we really started getting introduced to social media, and being able to have like MySpace when it first got started, because a lot of people don't even know about MySpace. We start there was I think there was another one that came out as well, but MySpace is kind of where I really started becoming more involved with um with social media. And then once I started getting to college, then Facebook came about, because at that time Facebook was mainly for college students. I think originally it was for like the top um, college students, and then eventually it made its way down to every college student before it started becoming like the mainstream place to go. So I was telling him that the millennials are a very I don't want to say unique, but the timing and when we came in, particularly if you were like in that mid millennial time period, it was really a interesting time, because there was always these transitions that kind of put us to where we are with social media. So then he asked me, like what was my personal challenge, when it came to that millennial age and how I grew up and things like that. I told him about the whole thing with being family oriented, being outside, being able to connect with kind of like being like the last of the people who did not have the constant social media, um I guess, feedback at that time, because all we just simply knew were the people who were just in our immediate environment. And so I said, if there was anything that we lacked, is that particular foundation, and the way that we were transitioned out of that foundation is kind of what the thing that I think really hurt us as millennials. I remember that, when I remember at one time, I told you guys I was watching Zorro, and there was just at one point Zorro and Vault Disney just did not come on anymore. And so when it happened the first time, I was like, okay, right? Like normally it would just like be shows like, I think at that time Boy Meets World would come on. And then that's a Raven would come on. And so like, but normally there would be that break period where it's like, okay, that's enough of that. Now we're gonna be going into Walt Disney. And then just out of nowhere, those shows were just gone. It was just like there was no true preparation for that. And then it's like, without realizing it, we were kicked out of an era and then being transitioned more into, everything that's simply being focused on just us, and all that type of stuff. And, without really any break, at least none that I saw. And so there was seem that from my perspective, okay, I don't know that's the truth for everybody, but from what I saw from the millennial perspective, there was always these moments where in which we were kind of transitioning, and then all of a sudden there would be this break of what we what we once had as this sense of, foundation, a sense of security, like it. And I often wonder, just for me, how did that really go into, where we are now and with social media? I know for me, I get burned out very easily when it comes to social media. I find myself now, anytime I need a break or something like that, I always find myself going back to certain stuff, from the 90s, just to have that nostalgia kick and just to go back and just remember certain things, or, easy. No, nowadays they have remixed a whole lot of lofi beats, and meditation music that are reminiscent of stuff that are from the 90s. So for me, I guess for me, I just like those types of sounds compared to the stuff that I hear now. So I wanted to share that. I really want to take the time to share that, because I want to know what your thoughts may be about what you may think the millennial generation was about. Particularly when it comes to with the youth and childhood, and really kind of watching how things transition for us. Like I really did, I didn't really take time to think about it, but it wasn't until he asked me that question about what did I think about this millennial time period, that I really started to see like how these changes were happening in some very critical times in our development. The brain doesn't fully develop until it's about 25 years old. So in the rise of social media, picking up from the time that I was a teenager in those moments, and then kind of watching how that sense of family, I guess I guess connection. Hey Andrea. Well, I guess the connection that seemed to be in place from the time when I was a kid growing up into like the preteen years, it just kind of seemed like it just went away, and then all of a sudden we were just kind of left with, that the the leftovers effects of social media. Not, and this is not in any way the bad social media. That look, we have good things and bad things out of any type of any type of era that we're in. But it's just, to me, I think there's a transition effect that we may not have been paying attention to, and I wonder if there has been, any type of, I get, and just in my mind, because you know how I think, you guys. I always think about certain things very differently. If you've been paying attention to me in like certain comments, if there's really ever been like a residual effect or a negative residual effect from those types of transition, where it's just seemed like we had something that we had gotten used to, and then just as our minds were really developing, there was just um these transitions effect that didn't seem like we transitioned smoothly. We just went through them, and now it's like here we are, right? Like here we are as adults, our brains and our minds, who we are now, we are fully fully, I won't say mature. We're grown now. Because not everybody's mature. We're grown now. And I've been really taking the time to think about, my own life. You know, why is it that I personally don't seem to really care much about social media as much these days? I mean, granted, I still keep up with it every now and then, for stuff. But me personally, I just don't seem like I really care much. And I think it plays a role with why I haven't really been doing much with YouTube lately. And then why, I've been wanting to try to pull back more, and, really I find myself listening to stuff from the 90s. Now, some of that could just simply be just regular nostalgia, right? But I do think it really goes back to um, the idea of just making this proper proper transition to know what it is that I'm really wanting to connect to now, And no, since millennial generation with how the transition for us in this moment in my life now, I really want to make sure that anything that I do that in transition now is something that is solid, is something that it connects, and something that is true to me. And really having that conversation with that young man made me realize how, when it comes to millennials, that having that transition never really came for us, at least from what I can see. In From my point of view, there was really no, um it was just kind of like we're being pushed into this in this phase now, and then they just dropped away from everything else that is actually sustainable, for a family, not just simply for us kids, but as a family as a whole. Now everything is kind of being self-centered, self-serving. A lot of these shows, it's just like it's just only about that particular market that they're wanting to reach, and it's like it's lost its appeal for, something that's more solid and more sustainable. And I think that for millennials, getting reconciling that and getting to a point where you can actually figure out what could this mean for you, what did it mean for you. I think it says something. And I'm just talking out of my head. I've been That's part of the reason why, like, I don't always get on live, because a lot of stuff now I just really I take time to think about, and I want to express them, but I don't know how it will translate for you. But I think this is something that is worth talking about. If you are a millennial, if you have kids that are millennial and you have noticed the transitions, or you look back now and you start seeing how those transitions may have, affected you in some way. I think it's a good conversation to have. What are your thoughts on that? And I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. I do plan to make more videos. I don't know if I'm going to do. I hope I could do more for this week. I've not been doing a whole lot of them lately, and I'll be sharing more of why I haven't been doing that. I wanted to do it on Sunday, but it just didn't come out because I had someone that had called me at the time, and it kind of, um, messed with the timing of this recording. So that's all I want to share for the time being. If I see that there's anything else that comes up for me, for me as a millennial personally, or what I've been seeing as a millennial generation, or anything else that may come up in this type of topic, I'll be sharing more, or I'll plan it out more, and then we'll see how much I talk about it. So in the meantime, if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure that you hit the like button. Make sure that you, if you want to share it, you can, but leave your comments, leave your thoughts down below as to what you, if you're a millennial, you've been through the millennial generation, and you've been able to see, how things have been affecting your life, from these transitions. What the transitions really there? Like, am I imagining things? What are your thoughts about that? And make sure that you hit the like button. If you're new here, make sure that you hit subscribe, so that way that you are alerted for more videos. Thank you, everybody, and I wish you a wonderful, amazing. I'll see you later.